Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be reacting to
10 American stereotypes I believed before visiting as a European.
French, and like many Europeans, I had a bunch of preconceived ideas about the US before I actually visited, and I have to admit that some were totally ridiculous, but some others actually turned out to be true. So let's explore that together, starting with the first stereotype I had, which is that Americans are very patriotic. True. So yes, as a European, when I first arrived, I was so surprised by how many American flags there were in the streets. Like, it's not really a thing in France. Like, people don't fly French flags in their front lawn. It's seen as being a bit weird. But on my side, as someone who loves cultures, I'm really into it. You know, I really like the 4th of July decor, especially in the suburbs of Chicago where my boyfriend is from. It is so cool and really gets me in a patriotic mood, even though I'm not from the US. But it's not only that, like, people really take the national anthem very seriously, like standing up at sports events, and Bobby told me that growing up he had to say the pledge.
No, I feel like the national anthem is everywhere the same, respect, you stand up, you know, and I feel like sport events is also sing it everywhere, you know, so I don't know if that's unique to the States. Pledge of Allegiance is unique, that's for sure.
Every single day at school, so it definitely feels overall like a more patriotic experience than what I've lived personally. But I just want to say that it's also very polarized. Like, Americans themselves have very strong opinions about their country, and I've met a lot of people who are very apologetic for being American, and this is maybe linked to the other stereotypes we're going to talk about in a bit. But I feel it's such a shame that these people feel the need to do that, because I feel the US is a really great place to be from. And you know, obviously, like in every country, there are good things and bad things, but in my personal opinion, and I've lived and worked in the US, I've been to 15 states, but I've also lived in 8 different countries, I can say that the US is a really great place to be from. But another funny side of this stereotype is sometimes some people have a tendency to see the US as the center of the world. Like, for example, you know, thinking you can pay in dollars in Paris. And obviously do not do that if someone accepts your dollars in Paris.
Yeah, that is, again, a true stereotype. Yeah, I do feel Americans view themselves as center of the world.
why would you think you could pay with dollars in Paris? That's so strange. I guess swipe your card? Like, you could swipe your card, no? Oh, no, she meant cash.
I would assume when you said that you mean cash.
Oh, no.
I guess they don't have good intentions and you're probably being overcharged. And in general, you should always read up about a country before visiting. Things are going to be very different from where you're from. And obviously not everyone is like that. If you're on this channel, you're probably really interested in cultures and you're trying your best to adapt, as I can see with all the really cool comments you're leaving on my videos. But this leads me to my second stereotype, which is Americans are supposedly bad at geography. By now, we've all seen these YouTube videos of people asking Americans to name a country, any country, just name a country. And obviously these videos aren't playing to the stereotypes, they're also cherry-picked. And I'm sure that if you shoved the camera on my face and yelled at me, I will forget all the countries. But since it's a live video and it's about my personal opinion on these stereotypes, I have to tell you about something weird that keeps happening to me in the US. And you know, maybe you have an opinion on that. So I'm from France and I grew up right there, and my dad is from Spain, the country in Europe that's right there. And you know, sometimes this comes up in conversation. Like, for example, if we're talking about our origins with people. And in the US, for whatever reason, people misunderstand or don't remember correctly and think I'm from Mexico. And you know, I love Mexico. I think it's a great country. I've spent a lot of time there during my travel. I've actually lived there for 6 months, but I am not from Mexico. I'm literally from the other side of the pond. Like, it's a 10-hour flight to go from...
I wonder why people, because Spain and Mexico, I don't even know how you make that conclusion that Spain and Mexico, what?
That's a big mix.
Yeah, I don't really know what to say about that.
To Mexico. And this has led to a very awkward situation, especially at work, with people going out of their way to be nice and introducing me as Mexican to actual Mexican people who are like, oh cool, which part of Mexico are you from? And I'm like, I'm
Guadalajara.
And you know, the people who forget where I'm from are very educated, they're trying to be nice, and I've never understood why this happens so often, and why it's always Mexico and not, for example, Canada, where they also speak French. But I feel at this point it's not even a question of geography, but more of listening when people tell you where they're from. And also I do feel that it's normal that some Americans don't know about every single European country. Like, the US is such a big country. There are many states already to remember. So I don't expect people to know about the exact place I'm from, because I personally don't know every single place in the US either. Also in Europe, where countries are very tiny and close to each other, like France is roughly the size of Texas. But there's also, for example, Monaco, which is the size of Central Park in New York. And you know, Europeans also generalize the US too. Like, one of my European pet peeves is when people have very strong...
Oh.
We react to that channel.
Yeah, we reacted to that video actually. the vibrators look down on Americans like the last week or so.
Opinions about the US for no reason, even though they've never been there. And this is because US politics are very discussed by international media. Also, American movies and American companies are everywhere, but they are not representative of the American culture as a whole. You can have an educated point of view about the whole American culture just by watching Home Alone, for example. And this stereotype is also linked to the next one, which is that Americans don't travel. And I have to say,
yeah, this one is Americans do travel, so it's not true. However, they might not travel outside of the U.S. because realistically, everything you ever need is within the U.S. If you want to, we have skiing. You can go to ski in the U.S. if you want. If you want a tropical climate, we have Florida, we have Hawaii. There's Puerto Rico. There's no. To be fair, if you're not don't want to go to a place specific, but you want to travel more for vacation, there's no reason to leave the country. Now, if you want to go to I want to see Eiffel Tower, yeah, you have to travel.
No, you could go to Vegas. There's Eiffel Tower there too.
Leaning Tower of Pisa. If you want to see the Leaning Tower of Pisa, okay. But yeah, a lot of people do travel a lot in the States. It's just as she said, the country is so big that you might not necessarily have to leave the country. So not leaving the country doesn't mean people don't travel.
This one is entirely not true. You've probably heard the myth that only 10% of Americans have passports.
I don't think that's a myth, though. I do think, well, okay, maybe not 10%, but a lot of people don't have passports because you don't need them. Because you only need a passport if you're going to leave the country. So, yeah, it's definitely more common in Europe to have a passport than here, that's for sure.
Well, apparently this has not been true for over 20 years. And apparently 3/4 of Americans have visited at least another country. So Americans...
Wow, that's more than I would have thought.
Are going abroad. They're just visiting fewer countries than us Europeans. Roughly 1/4 of Americans have been to 5 or more countries. When in France, that number is 54%. And in smaller European countries like the Netherlands, it's 83%. And that fully makes sense. There's two factors at play in international travel, which are basically how much money you have, because flights and hotels are expensive, but also how close you are to another country. If we take the example of the Netherlands, you could technically bike to Belgium. It's super close. Also, in the US, flights tend to be pretty expensive because you're pretty far away from other countries. Your only neighbors are Canada and Mexico. And the US is so massive that a lot of people prefer to travel domestically. There's already so much to do in the US. The nature is very diverse, there's a lot of really cool regional cultures, and also things are very, very far away from each other. For example, Barcelona in Spain is a very common weekend trip from where I grew up in France. It's roughly a 4-hour drive. In New York City, where I used to live, the same amount of driving only got me to Italy in New York State, which is in a very beautiful region and has really nice nature, really cool hikes, but obviously it's not another country. And another stereotype I had before going to the US is that Americans don't speak any other languages than English. And this one is not entirely true. The US is a country that has been built on immigration, and around 1 in 5...
I would say about this one, it's more common in Europe to speak at least 2 languages. I feel like almost everybody would speak at least 2 languages. Here is not as common, but at the same time, a lot of people do speak multiple languages. So you can't stereotype it, but if you want to say it's more common in Europe to speak multiple languages, I would agree with that.
American speaks a different language at home. But even if you're not already bilingual, it's never too late to start learning a new language with today's part video and lastly cool voice recognition. Some more stop waiting for the right moment to learn. Thing I've been warned of before going to the US is medical expenses. I've literally been told, be careful to not break a leg in the US, otherwise you'll be in debt. And given current events, it seems like a really big issue, but luckily for me, I haven't broken anything. And the only medical emergency I had while living in the US was an ear infection. And obviously ear infections are not life-threatening, but if you've ever had one, it hurts so bad that you're ready to do anything to make it stop. And on my side, I went to an urgent care facility where I saw a doctor, and it costed me $300. Luckily, my health insurance was very good at the time because I was working for a French company in the US, so I had to pay out of pocket, and then I was reimbursed. But in the time it took for me to get reimbursed, I was very scared that my claim was going to be denied or that I would not be reimbursed in full. And to be honest, $300 is a lot of money for an ear infection. If we compare that to my most recent ear infection, and I have sensitive ears, okay, which was in Paris, I had to pay $0 out of pocket. They didn't even have...
The wind, maybe, if they blows the draft or something like that. I honestly honestly, I have no idea.
To see my credit card, they only needed my health insurance card. If I had to pay out of pocket, it would have been 25 euros, which is around $26. So it is very, very cheap to see a doctor in France. And it's pretty easy to get an appointment for everyday stuff. Obviously, our system is not perfect, but I feel it's a pretty good one. I've never had any kind of medical stress in France. And obviously in the US, the stereotype varies quite a lot depending on your health insurance plan, because it depends on your employer. And I've seen both ends of the spectrum, like from people who didn't have dental and couldn't afford to get dental care, which really sucks, like it's so painful. On the opposite end of the spectrum, I've seen like stuff that's not very necessary being reimbursed. Like recently I was talking with my friends about this clinic that gives you a Chanel goodie bag after you give birth. So yeah, not very necessary. I'd rather not pay $300 if I have an ear infection. But yeah, overall I feel very grateful that I've always been super healthy. My family and all my loved ones have been very healthy, so I haven't tested extensively any medical system. And if you have and you want to share your experience, feel free to leave me a comment. Another thing I believe about the US is that people sue each other for no reason. Alright, I know this one is a bit of a weird one, but from a European perspective, it seems like the US is like the Wild West of lawsuits. Like just driving on the highway, you see a bunch of like personal...
Yeah, this one is true. Not that sue each other for no reason, it's just that suing is like way super common versus like in Europe you would never think to sue anybody. Like the wildest case for me, you know, the McDonald's one, where you ordered a tea on McDonald's, it was too hot, you spilled on yourself, and then McDonald's had to settle and pay like millions of dollars for the person. Like, that is just ridiculous to me.
No, it was really hot. You shouldn't burn yourself.
You should know that the coffee is hot. Okay?
No, but the degree of the burns were very, very bad.
I still,
like,
to me, that just
you shouldn't get like
thing.
a 4th degree burn. Like,
you should understand the coffee is hot and don't spill. That's not McDonald's fault, but okay.
Injury lawyers, you have to sign release forms all the time, and you hear about those crazy viral lawsuits. And here I can't talk about that without...
And yes, it was number one.
Release forms all the time, and you hear about those crazy...
McDonald's coffee case, that's the one.
No, that case was...
And here I can't talk about that
McDonald's was wrong in that case. We could watch a video of that so you could have a better understanding, because I feel like people hear...
She's talking about it.
Okay. So I feel like people hear about it and they think, oh, that's so silly. No. That coffee was really, 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 really hot.
That had to be hospitalized for 8 days after spilling McDonald's coffee on her lap. Like, I've seen the picture, and what happened to this lady was really horrible. She had 3rd-degree burns, and she decided to sue McDonald's to pay for her medical bills. That's just what she was asking for. The title of the New York Times documentary, A Watch About It, sums it best. Burned by hot coffee, then by the media. Like, she was painted by the news as just a dumb lawsuit that was fully useless. ABC News even called it the poster child of excessive lawsuits. And from a European perspective, that's just what I heard. I actually didn't know what happened to this lady, and obviously hadn't seen the pictures, which are awful. So I feel this stereotypes come from extreme cases that were very publicized, and in reality things are a bit more nuanced. Like, I feel suing for medical bills is totally understandable, and seriously, the very few people I know that have been involved in a lawsuit, it has been for a very good reason. But I don't think suing people qualifies as an American hobby. I don't know, and I don't want to know. I'm not a lawyer. I've never been involved in any lawsuits, and I intend for things to stay this way. Alright, so this is supposed to be...
But it is true, like, comparing to Europe, it is way more common. Obviously, not everybody sues for anything. You can't just sue somebody like, oh, you looked at me the wrong way, I will sue you. Yeah, it doesn't work like that. I guess you could, but you're not going to go nowhere with that. Yeah, you can, you're not going to go nowhere with that. But it is just way more common than in Europe, yeah. It's just the mentality, I guess.
Live video, and recently in my recommended I've had a lot of videos of Italians trying Olive Garden, and you know, as you could expect, their
react to them too.
Reactions are not very good. They are very scared to go there, they don't really like the food, and overall they find the experience very bland and inauthentic, and that's often how Europeans tend to perceive American food. And I have to admit that I did believe that before I visited the US, but luckily I was proven entirely wrong. The US is a massive country with a very rich food culture that varies from state to state, and I have to say that this stereotype is absolutely untrue. I feel this bad image stems from the fact that our only contact with American food in Europe are the big fast food chains. Like, for example, I used to have a terrible image of fried chicken because I only knew about KFC and it didn't look really good to me. Like, I thought this was pure junk food and I was not really willing to try it. I usually don't really like big chains because I prefer to go to small shops. But a few years ago, my American boyfriend actually brought me to Atlanta, Georgia to go to one of the best fried chicken restaurants in the world. And there we actually met the chef who told us about the recipe that hasn't changed since 1945. And like they really put so much love and care into it. Like they marinate the chicken overnight. It's super juicy and tasty, and they serve it with really delicious sides. And since then, it's such a big fan of fried chicken and southern food in general. I even love chicken and waffles, which is another food that would send Europeans into a coma, but it's so good. And I feel that in general, the US has comfort food so well. And there are so many small businesses that are not owned by big corporations. And I feel you obviously shouldn't rule out American food just because you've seen McDonald's or KFC. Like, it's really my pet peeve when Europeans say the food is not tasty in the US, because not only there's really good American foods, but there's also food from all over the world. Like, for example, in New York, I've tried really authentic Malaysian food, Indian food, Indonesian food, and all of these foods are made very authentically. Like, they keep the recipes the same as at home, and they often import some spices or products.
Oh, she's a good
Stereotype
eater.
number 8 is that people love to work. And obviously I'm French, so it comes to no surprise to you that
in the US, we usually get 2 weeks. Okay.
people have a lot of vacation time in France, but that's one image I had of Americans. And I do feel this one is kind of true. Like, there is this always on mentality where people are always thinking about business or maybe building side hustles and always trying to make things happen. And obviously,
I think that depends where you at. Cause her experience is from New York. I would definitely think that's the case in New York. I think that's the case in the big cities.
Especially in the finance.
Yeah, but if you go somewhere more like in a smaller towns, it's definitely not that type of mentality.
You're wondering, does these people ever go to work?
Yeah,
Why are people shopping in the middle of the day?
Yeah, it's definitely not that. But in a big city, I think that is true. So again, it depends where you are.
sometimes it's a necessity. Like, people who have several jobs, they don't always do that because they love it. Like, they need to pay rent. But
Right, that's also, this is not because they want to. This is, you have to.
It's more of the focus in the US in having a side hustle, monetizing your passions. Whereas in France, I know a lot of people, for example, who are very good at a skill like art, but just do that in private and will never think of monetizing anything. And this also ties up with stereotype number 9, which is that Americans are very optimistic and outgoing. And that's a thing that I had to adapt to in the US because it's not in my culture, but now I really love small talk. I love how positive people are, and I've already talked about it in the other video I made about the US, but that's something that makes daily life a bit nicer. And honestly, I feel like this outgoing energy is reflected everywhere, which leads me to my next stereotype that everything is big in the US. This one, coming from a European perspective, is entirely true. The highways are massive, the cars are very big, the portion sizes are massive, although now I'm used to it and I really like it. And one thing that's for sure massive...
That's my biggest one. How can you not like big portion sizes? I do not get that.
In the US is the distances. The US is such a big country, and recently I crossed it from New York to SF by train, and it took me 3 days. I also made a video about my thoughts, and I think you should watch
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, interesting video.
Guys, of course, let us know your thoughts. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Join the Discord, and as always, share as much kindness as possible.